past 30 days, the amount of questions we've been getting about industrial hemp and hemp processing. Because right now, all hemp testing is purely voluntary. But for the sake of interstate commerce and compliance, you got to get it tested somehow. And so there's a lot of lack of information about metric process, which is actually really easy, and I've got business cards and some answers about that from the Colorado Department of Agriculture's cannabis education specialist, who's been extremely helpful in these issues. That's a mouthful, sorry. But right now, there's sort of a ambiguity for testing labs. You can kind of get it tested by the university if it's hemp, but the second it turns into something with CBD or gets processed into food or tinctures or topicals, you need a little bit more compliant testing. And right now, as a state certified lab, we can't touch a lot of that product. And so I think that there's kind of a gap in clarity there.
So you're kind of right, but you're wrong a little bit as well. There actually is a protocol for hemp, people who are registered within the hemp program to get their hemp products tested in a certified laboratory. They do have to participate in RFID, but it's just a batch. Unlike the marijuana industry, they don't have to have everything tagged RFID, they just have to do a small batch of that. Otherwise it would be literally impossible because these are people that are doing tens of thousands of acres. And they're not going to go around and they seed in a completely different way. It's not traditionally grown clone the way you do the marijuana industry. Now, again, I don't think that there's a real impetus to require like compulsory testing. I think that by putting into language that the pre-market products, when the products go to market, that they have to meet that threshold, that will take care of the demand on its own for testing, and I think that will be enough of an incentive for these hemp food people to get their products tested, because they're going to want that backdoor safety thing. I think that that's just smart and common business sense. There's no reason to mandate it, because again, this is an industry that wants to do right by public safety, and there's been no agenda to sort of weasel out of regulations or to, because we aren't the industry that's spraying ridiculous, Avid and Mallet and crazy unapproved pesticides on our product. These are farmers who are already abiding by agricultural law and through EPA and through CDA and USDA again. So it's just a matter of just making sure that their pre-market products and their market products meet the thresholds that an apple would meet, or that fish oil would meet.
Can I just follow up a little bit more with your question? So I have a testing co-op that I'm allowed to currently let other people use my tags and Metric if they so choose not to sign up with Metric. Let me just clarify, SB 196 allowed us access to the labs, the state certified MJ labs, versus just third-party labs because test results were all over the board. The state certified labs, they are the most credible labs that we could get any kind of testing done with. That's why we need access to them. This is voluntary. You can sign up for Metric if you so choose to at a fee, get your own tags, and work directly with the labs, or you can sign up with Grow Hemp Colorado through the testing co-op. I've been working with a lot of labs, and there was a massive confusion going on until just recently when it was acknowledged that no hemp lab or any state certified lab didn't have criteria for hemp testing. There was no testing protocol, unlike marijuana. Marijuana testing protocol is very specific. So the state labs were just kind of thrusted into this ability to test for hemp, but yet with no criteria or protocol. There is now through open records requests, we were able to access the state's protocol regarding sample testing. That means the part of the plant that they take from the field to bring to their lab to test. This is all the same thing we should be using, that same protocol for our samples that we take from our field or greenhouses to the lab. The lab also has testing protocol now for the state protocol, everything from drying, how to get the sample prepared, to how it tests on the gas chromatograph. So there is now, and I encourage everybody, if you don't have it already, I'm happy to give you the protocol the state does implement, so we can follow that same criteria for our sample testing, as well as the labs that we're working with, regardless if they're state registered or not. Because there is no guarantee if you do not bring your sample in correctly. There is no guarantee if the lab is testing correctly according to the correct protocol. So That test though holds no water with the CDA, whether it's from a private lab or from a certified lab, it does not matter to the CDA. So there's a lot of disputing going on this year because some people got private tests done from different labs for their crop. CDA comes out and tests them and says, this is not the same test that we have. That test doesn't matter. It's the CDA test, that's the only thing that matters. But the key thing is you guys and we get our protocol down correctly as well as the labs to test correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's more of the direction I was trying to take. Not that anyone's trying to be allowed or that I think, mandatory CPC must happen. Because that would be a tremendous disincentive to the industry. As a stakeholder, nobody wants that. So yeah, thanks so much for going into thorough detail, and it has been interesting to dive into the voluntary testing and learn some of these finer points of compliance. I guess I was just asking on behalf of a lot of cultivators who don't seem to know where to get those questions answered. So we're getting tons of that call on, and so thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, and just one more clarification I'll get to, Grant, is that testing labs are not regulatory or enforcement agencies. If a lot of people get worried, oh, if I'm testing over 0.3 or 1 or whatever, are they going to report me to law enforcement? I've actually had some labs ask me if they should report. I said no, unless you want to get sued. So this is proprietary information. It only goes back to you, the customer. The lab does not report to anyone except for Metric, which is our web interface system that we're using, their servers basically for this RFID tag situation. But they are not enforcement or reporting agencies, just so we are all clear. Grant, and then I'll get over to you.
Let me just add one thing
Yeah.
before Grant, and I would just say, so as a business practice, as processors and farmers, you should be doing this anyway, internally, as a quality control measure. Don't wait for somebody to tell you you have to test. And you, as a licensed MED laboratory, start a spin-off that's not a licensed, that does takes the testing equipment to the facility and tests it on site to facilitate the quality control. This is how every other industry operates. You've got to incorporate these practices into what you do. You're going to say, Bob, it's costly. Bob, this is something that we can't do right now. You got to do it. You got to do it. Because if you don't do it and it gets imposed on you, the cost triples and quadruples. Grant.
I have two questions. One is related to this next question. So I, as a farmer, let's say I sell my product to this view over here, this question. I get my stuff tested to Metric, because that's not a registered farmer. Can he sign up for Metric and get that all set up so that he can, after he processes, have it tested legally? Yes, yes, you can.
No, you cannot register with Metric unless you are registered with the CDA. So if you have registered with the CDA, then you definitely can. We did 196. We were only trying to protect really the hemp farmers and our hemp products. We forgot about the processors, I think, which they needed protection. We just kind of didn't think about that at the time. But yeah, processors who are not registered with CDA technically have no legal protection under our registration and cannot use Metric unless we're registered. So yes, it's required.
So maybe then this bill should address that, because that was kind of your question too. So maybe that's something that needs to be addressed. I'm not going to ask or advocate how or make suggestions. But question number two, this bill amended the definition of industrial hemp. What we amended it
To add, to make sure that it's broad enough and clear enough that industrial hemp includes all parts of the hemp plant, all of its naturally occurring constituents and parts.
to.
So,
We have that definition now.
well, so the definition as it defined is it stands in Amendment 64, yes. But we just want to re-clarify that and include industrial hemp products into that definition. Because while industrial hemp products is spelled out in statute, there's no real definition for it. What we just want to make sure is that we can defeat the argument that happened last year that was coming from certain factions within the marijuana industry, that CBD was marijuana, and that no one was allowed to produce anything with CBD in it, or else they were making marijuana. And to us, that's troubling because this is a naturally occurring product within the hemp plant. And it's not a part of the plant that causes any public safety risk the way that THC does. There's a reason THC is spelled out in Constitution, federally, and in statute, okay? And there's a reason that other of the naturally occurring cannabinoids aren't. So we wanna make sure that all parts of the industrial hemp plant are secure in their definition.
Yeah, and just one more thing real quick. Naturally occurring cannabinoids is a very important word because of the HIA-DEA court case, in my opinion. So why we're using naturally occurring cannabinoid over and over again is because we're trying to drill it in everyone's head. So please start using that. Yes, next question. Sure, and then use that and then. Go ahead, you in the back.
I also work for one of the state certified labs, and we do a lot of testing for hemp farmers, and as you know, Veronica, when they don't have tags, I send them to you, and you give them the metric tags so they can bring in their samples. And it's really important for all the farmers to understand that depending on the lab, or if it's CDA, the instrumentation that they use is very important. If they're using a gas chromatograph, that's heating the sample and changing the molecular structure of the hemp, almost decarboxylating it into THC. Yes. We use liquid is the analysis. That's not an issue. And so many times a lot of people don't know that, and they're being told that they're failing because they're coming in over 0.3%. We use the liquid chromatograph, but it's the gas, that's the one that's changing the molecular structure. So it's just important that everyone's aware of that, because that's an issue. Because
Well,
you might not be failing.
I do appreciate that, and I think that one other thing we do need to have is another meeting after this to talk about rulemaking meeting, and so we can maybe address some testing protocol changes. I mean, the fact of the matter is I'm unwilling 1,000% to ever go against the CDA and our program in a public position, and I feel that we need to address some issues, but we need to do it first working with our program through rulemaking. So after this meeting, I think we should discuss testing, some testing protocol changes, and get any grievances out so we can continue forward on our program. I'm gonna take yours, and then Zev, and then I'll get over to you. Yes, sir.
So I'm a medical doctor, and as a medical doctor, I want to know is there anything the medical community can do to help the cause in terms of understanding how we can promote uses of CBD for health benefit reasons without turning this into a medication that the FDA can control over.
So to answer your question about, the medicinal side of things, I mean, obviously there's a number of different physician organizations that study the endocannabinoid system and cannabis and how cannabis interacts with the human body. I would start there. 2 or 3 and 4 years ago, some of these organizations there were a lot of quack doctors, to be frank, but it's changed dramatically. There's a lot of docs in there now that are reputable, that have taken the real core, smart, intelligent people that have been doing this for decades and decades and decades to the next level. So there are physician organizations. I can look them up on my email. I don't have them off the top of my head. Maybe we can catch up after this. But no, there's reputable organizations out there for physicians. Not the least of which just there's folks that share quality information. The Impact Network here in Colorado is one of those organizations, and they share really, really good information on the endocannabinoid system. But then again, at the end of the day, it's not. There needs to be a conduit between the finished product makers and the doctors. There needs to be something in between. Doctors should say you should look into this, but I don't think doctors at this point in time, considering the federal illegality, can go so far as to say, try this, try how much. Even if you say to a patient, try this, you don't know what to tell them to try, what quantity, what product, because we're not there yet. So
is there some research done on this? I mean, we looked this up the other day, and some of them were CBD based, some of them were THC based, but there were research, double-blind, randomized controlled trials as strong as any other drug research out there. My brother's a researcher, so I was looking at this stuff on him, and I was like, this is real research. Why can't we apply that?
Well, this question is, there's no research, why can't we apply it? So they are about to apply it with GW Pharmaceutical and the government's patent that they own our CBD under. So they are about to try to exercise that ability to use it and profit huge through the medical industry. I think it is important to note we do not want to call our products, even with CBD or not, medical or medicinal, or that type of word is dangerous in industrial hemp. It's more for the marijuana side, but definitely not for our industrial hemp products. It's a slippery slope when we start using the word medical or medicinal, especially for our naturally occurring cannabinoids that may be in that product. So we try not to say medical. That's why we're trying to keep it under like the food or cosmetic supplement we can't even use right now. But Yeah, I think you should hook up with Bob, he can point you in some other directions.
And just one thing to really focus on, if to the extent you want to drive this train, what the medical community needs to come out and say in a unified fashion is that cannabinoids, CBD in particular, is not harmful to the human body. Because that is the biggest misconception out there. I think most of us in this room know it's not only not harmful, but actually tremendously beneficial. But that's not common knowledge. In fact, we are the vast minority on that.
Yes, Sam.
A question for, I think it's Samantha and Matt. What if the legislature comes back and says, we want a processor's license? What's your thinking about that? How would you go with that?
We actually talked about that, and we didn't want to put that burden on a particular agency that didn't want that, right? Particularly the CBA, who's charged statutorily with seed through harvest. So where does that go? Where does that fall? We've got some language that we think obviates a need for that. It doesn't create the fiscal note, the budget aspect of what that would require. But if that comes up, if an agency is willing to take that on, and through the political channels that the lobbyist folks know far better than I about how funding gets worked out behind the scenes in that respect. If somebody wants to take that on, we've drafted a regulatory scheme for processors. We just don't want to force it on somebody who doesn't want it. We're going to try to keep it as simple as possible.
Do you want one? There you go.
My personal opinion is I think it should default under CDKG because they're already in charge of anything for human use and consumption, and it's already basically a process there. The problem is that we have to address is that CDKG in this particular division that we're dealing with right now is partially federally funded. So we got to figure out how we force their hand and still get them paid. I don't know. Okay.
What about taxes?
I think what some of the picture that a lot of people are missing is that these licenses exist. They exist. It's called a wholesale food manufacturing license. They exist. There's no reason. Again, the point is not to create an extra regulatory burden for an industry and treat it differently. That's the point. The point is not to create a brand new licensing process. Now, if we want to have a registration process that says these are people that are known processors, they've been vetted a little bit, and they have familiarity with any regulatory agency, that's fine. There's registration exists across the spectrum in all industries. There are registered, chemical dealers and all that stuff. The point is, and we don't want to get away from this narrative because it's the true narrative. And the true narrative is that industrial hemp is an innocuous yet beneficial commodity, and it's something that we should not be treating any different. We should not be holding it to any higher standards than we would other agricultural commodities. Why? Because it doesn't pose a risk of diversion. We freely and actively import hemp from across the nation. We're the only G7 nation in the world not to grow it and produce it ourselves as it stands and compared to other countries. And two, that it doesn't pose a risk. Nobody is getting DUIs for their hemp. Nobody is dying from hemp overdoses. Nobody's getting poisoned because their hemp product's spoiled. Like milk does sometimes, or like food. No one's getting salmonella poisoning from hemp. So it's important that as long as you are following and abiding by the precedent set within tradition, if you're growing tomatoes, that you're following all the laws that you would if you're growing tomatoes. Which means you're using the approved pesticides and agricultural techniques, that you're using approved food manufacturing techniques, that if you are creating timber, that you're using proper food and building techniques, when you're making a building. So that's the important narrative here. To create an extra licensing process is going to divert from that narrative, and it's going to feed into this idea that I think most of the people in this room have been fighting against and educating and advocating for a long time, which is this is just a normal crop, and we should be able to use it.
I would just add one thing to that, and that is, yes, if you're producing food products, the wholesale manufacturing license is what you need to get. We can't put all processors into one box. Because right now when you say processor, you're thinking about an oil extractor. in 3, 5, 8 years from now, the oil extraction piece of this is what, 7 of the 8 pieces of pizza pie in our industry. In 5 years, the oil extraction is going to be 1.5, 2 pieces of the industry. And we're talking about building product processors. You're talking about other product processors. So to create a category, I think out of the blue and regulate it would be a mistake, because I think you start to hamper these other things. So use that statute I referred to earlier with a slight tweak and the wholesale manufacturing license, which already exists as the processing license. That said, if agency X wants to do it with those things in mind, we'll play ball.
And just Mitch, if you could help us understand why or what CDA does with the livestock feed and the animal food, because animal food is not under CDPHE, and why is that?
Well, that's history. We typically are agriculture. They view animal feed as agriculture, and I think that's where, it's an old statute, probably 50 or 60 years old, so I think it would just default, it came to add. But there is that provision in there, much like the food piece, that says there are these ingredients that can be used. And so to address that, it would have to be addressed in the same manner. Oregon did this to some extent, not being heavily involved in the feed and the food piece, but they kind of went through this, and we've had meetings with Oregon, and they seem to think it's okay. The regulatory people say, we just manage it, if that's what the state law was. So I think that helps.
But animal food also, like if you had dog biscuits, that would be under CDPHE, and hopefully we also address that in the bill, but not sure totally about that yet, because we don't want to do anything that's not fully in support of the CDA if it does affect them somehow. Yes, sir.
Just for clarification purposes, we're kind of new to this, but I want to understand this. So if we had an end product that was a food-based item, and everybody wants to use the word CBDs as a medicinal, you can't say that. Is the best thing all you can put on it hemp oil, that's it? If you're going to go out there in order to sell it across state lines, is that all you can really write? Is hemp oil?
Well, let's talk about definitions maybe right now, so we can all get on the same page of what we should consider calling our product and or labeling. So Sam, want to go down the line of our input?
Sure, I would just treat it like orange juice or milk, again, to go back to milk for example. So, or even an antioxidant, so you can, you just infuse, you're enriching it, is what you're doing. So you're taking something that's naturally occurring anyways within the hemp food product, and you're just enhancing it and enriching it. It's like how I can go to the store and buy vitamin D whole milk or calcium enriched orange juice. Or antioxidant enriched cereal. You're taking a food product and you're taking something that probably naturally occurs in one of the ingredients in that food product, and you're just enhancing it. So, how that gets made, I think there's a lot of ways to navigate that, because food, as we all know, when you walk in the grocery store, is made in very interesting ways, and that's proprietary information. And that's your business and how you do that.
So the answer to the question is, what do you call it? Again, don't call out the individual cannabinoids, because that's not what you're selling. And frankly, for those people that produce an isolate or purchase isolates, that is the specific substance that will be precluded if and when Epidiolex is approved. So what you need to produce is a full spectrum oil, hopefully with a THC content, not just 0.3 or below, but 0.000 something or below. And that is the product. So what do you call it? Phytocannabinoid enriched oil? You want to call it hemp extract, stalk oil? This is a marketing piece. But the idea is it's extracted from the hemp plant and it's enriched, because there are people that like to use hemp oils, but don't want it that's enriched with cannabinoids. They want to go to Whole Foods and buy the cold pressed, sterilized seed oil, but they don't want to take it, because there are some drug tests, by the way, that simply test for the presence of cannabinoids, not specifically for THC. So if my job is dictated by me passing a drug test, and I'm not going out and getting high and taking high levels of THC, that would be frowned upon by my employer. But if I fail that drug test because I've got high levels of CBN, CBD, etc., CBG, whatever the case might be, if I fail that drug test, I lost the job. Guess who's potentially responsible for that job loss? The producer of that finished product. So that's one of the reasons why you need to identify the cannabinoid-rich aspect.
Okay, thanks. I'll tell you what I do. I've changed my definitions of my product labels many, many times, as I'm sure other people have too. I recently got a bunch of stuff confiscated by Texas, San Antonio, Texas narcotics unit. I had shipped through FedEx, like totally normal, and the dog, I guess, sniffed my package and sniffed marijuana. They did a field test. I didn't realize the field test was for cannabinoids. I failed the field test, and I went to the Narcotics Drug Task Force lab. I only had my lab test from a certified lab that showed non-detectable THC and the levels of CBD. Law enforcement laughed and thought I was really a crooked crook, and I was calling them to find out where my stuff is at. They sent it to the lab, and it also concluded with non-detectable THC. They only returned half of my product for some reasons because some of the CBD was higher on my capsules than it was in my lip balms. They said it was still up in the air. This is what I dealt with. It was good. I didn't get criminally charged. I got some of the product released, but it also taught me that I needed to change labels again. So I have changed my labels to say not from marijuana. I have whole plant extract for like ingredients. I have whole plant extract, and then I put in parentheses CBD. I do it more generally now. I don't like to confuse the word hemp oil with hemp press seed oil because I think there is a lot of confusion with that right now. I do say that it's, whole plant extract from industrial hemp, and then in parentheses, tiny small, I put CBD. At this point, it's pretty much a given. At least a lot of the other states kind of already almost acknowledge there's CBD in some hemp product from Colorado, so it's not a super stretch. But when it comes to law enforcement, if I'm going to get my product back, I need to make sure that, number one, it's not looking medical, it's not trying to state any specific thing, and it looks almost very, very normal. I need it to look normal, so in my ingredients, all I do is say whole plant extract from industrial hemp and then have the CBD in the parentheses now. I know there is some other people that think that we should have like a whole cannabinoid profile, yada yada. I'm not really into that. I think that just opens Pandora's box a little bit more. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I work for Alfalfa's organic grocery store, and we sell a myriad of different extract brands. We have a sign called full spectrum extract, which, from my understanding, is legal. And then some of the brands say CBD, some of them don't. But the health department wants to investigate it. They're coming up Tuesday to speak with me. And I'm wondering, do they have a legal right to pull any of those products?
Yes, unfortunately they do. So when we first started addressing this, I worked with the Boulder County Health Department for many, many years, and the inspector there told me it was really up to their discretion for the inspectors if they came into the commercial kitchen and we were working with hemp products or CBD products. Now, when it comes to the actual stores, I think what's happened at CDPHE is starting to trickle down. Anything for human use or consumption using industrial hemp, especially with the word CBD in it. And this doesn't just include foods or tinctures, but lotion and balms and anything for human use or consumption. I mean, they probably are going to pull it. I don't know, Bob, you want to?
So we're talking about the county department of health, so they're going to probably start to adopt the standards that the CDPHE has concerning that adulterant status. Legality-wise, that statute should be protection. Legality-wise, things should be very clear, but from a regulatory perspective, when you talk about Department of Health, adulterant status, that's really the issue right now. And again, we've worked with the CDPHE to get them to a position where they're not going to enforce that right now. They're going to give this statute a chance because we've convinced them properly that the FDA has never gone after anybody producing hemp oils or CBD, for example, under this adulterant status. So what I thought had happened in Boulder was that they came in and said, you're selling marijuana. And if that's what they said, then, let's punch them at the door and knock them out because they're wrong. But if they're saying something else, then we need to really drill down into their authority and what they have to interpret and et cetera.
Well, what originally happened is our grocery department brought in a coffee that had Uber botanical CBD. And the Daily Camera wrote an article and titled it, retailer selling black coffee. And it was ridiculous. And then the actual article, you read it, says it's not, it's marijuana, it doesn't have THC, all that stuff. But because of that title, the health department saw it, came in and pulled it. And then that started the whole snowball effect of now they want to research all our pet products. So I'm trying to find a way of how do we protect that with my departments have extracts so that they can't pull it. And I don't know, maybe they can pull some and not others based on the labeling. So I'm just trying to be prepared for Tuesday essentially.
Well, I know you or someone from health office has been in touch with our office, and we've been talking about that, so we can certainly come offline. The people from the Boulder County Health Department sat on a Boulder County Marijuana Advisory Committee with me, and we have a really open dialogue. I'm sure we can have the same type of exchange we had with the CDPHE. It really put us in a good spot right now, so we can talk to it.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to back up Bob's point, in most of these situations, communication with your regulators is essential. I think Mitch can stipulate to this that the people who are the most honest, open, and transparent and communicative with the Department of Agriculture when it came to what they were growing when this program was first starting are the people that have not experienced that kind of like intense scrutiny and distrust for regulators because they're being open about it. When you're exclusive and you don't talk, you're just communicative and you drop off the radar, that raises red flags. So it's always just best to talk to these people. Education is your number one tool. Just educate them, say, well, we can, all these processors can probably trace these products back to products that were grown or, in a legal manner, or that processed in a legal manner, and you can trace these back. And just educate them on what the difference is.
They really don't know.
They just don't know.
Yeah, and I guess my prediction would be from CDPH telling us that it's okay for us to do this in state, and they're not going to do any enforcement, I guess you might be the guinea pig. So we should watch this case closely and really support her. I do feel Boulder is kind of a good place to have this happen because we're kind of progressive over here, including our DA Sandbernet. So.
Yeah, we're the only retailer that has brought in CBD or extracts and really tried to be on the forefront of doing that to open that door so that other retailers can. So for us, obviously, beyond the sales, the benefits to people, this is a really important unprecedented thing. So.
Thank you. She was just saying how it was so important, and she was the first one, or Office was the first store to really try to embrace industrial hemp and CBD products onto their shelf. Let's take a few more questions. Does anyone want to take a break? We're going to have a little bit of samples out for food in a minute. We do have a lot more discussion to go. Is anyone interested in taking a short little break in a minute?
Yes. Discount is added.
Yes, sir.
I've been working in the dietary supplementation field for 40